Hi, and welcome to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm your host, Ray Treverson from OTG Capital. Really pleased to welcome back to the microphone Stuart Sherry, who is a superannuation specialist from the Institute of Financial Professionals of Australia, IFPA, or ifpa.com.au. Now, for those of you that aren't aware, Stuart's been on the show before. And Stuart, last time you were with us, we were talking about downsizer contributions, weren't we?
That's right. We were talking about downsizer contributions. I think the key message there was you don't actually have to downsize to make a downsizer super contribution.
Yes, it's one of those interesting things that, when people refer to language and when you expect it from a government bureaucracy, you expect it to actually mean something, but it's actually not the case. I might also mention to the listeners that we broadcast locally here on Radio Northern Beaches, but we also go nationally through the community radio network around Australia. I think we've been syndicated to about 10 or 12 different community radio stations out there as well. And you can also find us on blogs, social media, Spotify, iHeart, multimedia extravaganza. What can I say? So look, Stuart, we got you back on because we're doing quite a lot of shows on superannuation. We've recently had Centrelink or Services Australia talking about claiming lost super, as well as we were talking off air, lost Medicare benefits, and you got some money back for your sister you were mentioning to me very briefly as well.
That's right. I think there's a site out there. You can just Google, or not Google for this particular site, but if you put in your surname, it'll come up with various entities that owe people matching that surname some money. So you can help yourself out or maybe help out a family member.
It's one of those interesting things that, again, when I was talking to Justin Bott at Services Australia, it's just education. People aren't aware. And one of the things that we're going to be covering today is super and hardship, that a lot of people sort of do understand that when they put money into superannuation, it does get locked away because it's meant for retirement. Okay. And I think everybody garners that idea pretty well. But access to super has been one of those interesting things that certainly previously we had 2 lots of access allowed during the Morrison years when COVID was on. Both $10,000 lots. I railed against that because I thought it was really poor policy. And I think the people that did it will end up regretting it many years from now when they see the impact of that. But there are some very valid reasons why people can actually access their super early, and we're going to cover that today. So Stuart, within your subject matter expertise at IFPA, you deal with a lot of second-tier tax agents and accountants. So when does this situation come up that people need to touch their super before they're entitled to?
Yeah, great point. So as you alluded to before, there's a camp out there that think the only time you can access your super is when you've attained age 60 and retired. But as you mentioned, you can access it before then under very limited scenarios. So examples include, for example, under compassionate grounds and under what we call severe financial hardship. So under compassionate grounds, that's where you do not have the means to pay for what we call an eligible expense. And under severe financial hardship, that's where we've been in continuous receipt of, say, social security benefits, such as job seeker, and we can't afford reasonable living expenses.
So I'm curious that when you talk about hardship, that's pretty nebulous, I guess. Are there fairly hard guidelines that, when somebody comes and knocks on the door of I guess it would be the ATO in this instance, wouldn't it? Or would it be, who did they go and talk to?
Yeah, good point. So it depends on the condition, what we call the condition of release that you're going for. So we have compassionate grounds. That is administered by the Australian Taxation Office, the ATO. So you'd apply via MyGov to access your super under compassionate grounds. And then we have severe financial hardship. In that instance, you'd go to the super fund. But as you're alluding to, there are strict rules that apply.
So when we're talking hardship, one person's hardship, other people might look at that and go, well, that's not that hard. Who makes that kind of determination?
In that instance, it is the super fund. So it's the super fund that makes that call. And you make a great observation that it can seem a little bit subjective, but the rules are not that subjective. They're actually quite prescriptive. So we had once, I mean, I've worked at a couple of super funds over the years, and a long time ago, there was a member and they wrote into their super fund and said, I'm experiencing financial hardship. I'd like to withdraw $10,000 and I'm going to use that $10,000 to buy a new car. And unfortunately, that wasn't sufficient. And so we wrote back to the member and we said, look, sorry, you haven't satisfied what we call the severe financial hardship condition of release. And the member wasn't too happy. So what they did was they wrote to their member of parliament. And so the member of parliament then wrote into the super fund and said, look, a member of my constituent, let's just make up the name, John isn't happy because he wanted to withdraw $10,000. And I think you should let him because he really likes that car and he's a great guy. So can you please release $10,000 for John? Unfortunately, the rules are not that flexible. So severe financial hardship, what do we mean there? We're talking about scenarios where you've been in continuous receipt of income support payments, such as Centrelink or job seeker payment for 26 weeks at least.
Right.
And you do not have the means to pay reasonable expenses like rent, food, utilities. And so we'll make that call whether you're eligible.
So I see on your notes that you provided me also, I see a really good one here, preventing the forced or foreclosure, a sale of a home. Now, I would see that as being a darn good reason to tap back into super. But I'm curious again, because again, this is contextual. If somebody's landed themselves in that kind of sticky situation, let's say, for example, and gosh, I hear about this all the time, they decided to invest their hard-earned money in crypto and it's gone, and they come back and going, oh my God, I now can't pay my mortgage. Do the super funds and the regulators go back and look at the circumstances as to why people have ended up there, or do they simply say, we don't want this person to lose their home, we will give this a condition of release, here's your cash? Is that the kind of situation, Stuart, or do they simply take somebody's word and say, yep, fine?
They'll require evidence. So in the scenario that you're alluding to, foreclosure of a home, that is an eligible expense which you can access your super under what we call compassionate grounds. So in that scenario, we'd go to the ATO via MyGov and we'd say, please, ATO, the bank is knocking on my door. They're about to foreclose on my home, and the ATO will allow the release of up to what we say, I think, 3 months worth of mortgage repayments and 12 months worth of interest in that scenario, so long as you don't have money on the side which you can use and you're genuinely going to use your home. How you got to that situation, speculative investments, the ATO, the super fund, won't judge you on that. It's just the hard facts. The bank is going to foreclose on you.
So if you're visiting Crown Casino too often, somebody might sit there and look at you and go, maybe not clever, but I guess they're robbing Peter to pay Paul, to use an idiom that, they're selling their long-term future down the path for this short-term gain. And I guess that's one of the aspects. Conditions of release have been the kind of things that we talk about on this show quite a lot, because self-managed super funds have also become an avenue where people have decided, oh, here's a good way to get early release. Now, Stuart, we talk about this quite a bit within the industry, but do you see that quite a lot at IFPA within the policy framework, and also, through your interaction with your client base and users, that this is seen as another avenue of being able to get to their super?
No, I don't. Generally, we deal with clients who have advisors or accountants, and what we're finding is that people who have accountants or advisors, they're generally not involved in these schemes. They might be more promoted by what we call illegal operators, if you like. And so, no, they don't really come across our desk too often, but they're certainly very notable when they do happen. We certainly hear about them in the media, but yeah, when you have a trusted advisor, they generally steer you in the right direction.
I guess it's one of the things that when we're talking about early release, that the conditions are very strict, and I see far too many what I would just blatantly call scams, but they're hidden in terminology and, hey, this is perfectly legal kind of scenarios. But I know when people started looking at SMSFs, and I've had my own now for 25 years, the temptation, because the bank account's there and they can see the money and they're going, oh, that's my money, but they're actually not allowed to touch it. And so that's a real one. And I think, just for clarity's sake, if it's an SMSF that's involved and there's these kind of conditions of release, it's not the ATO now, it's the actual trustee that makes the determination, isn't it?
Same rules apply to large APRA funds, retail funds, and SMSFs. It depends on the type of condition of release. So under compassionate grounds, that is always administered by the ATO. So if you are your own SMSF, you're a trustee of the SMSF,
Right.
breathe a sigh of relief there, because you don't need to make the call. As a member of that SMSF, you'd still need to go to the ATO. You'd still go to MyGov. You'd still give them the evidence of the expense, whether it be a medical expense, foreclosure of a home, to pay for the funeral expenses of a loved one.
Right.
You'd still provide that to the ATO, and the ATO will then go to the trustee of the SMSF, which is the same as the member, and ask them to release that money to the ATO, and the ATO would pay the member of the SMSF. So in that scenario, it's pretty straightforward. Where it does become a problem is where we're talking about the severe financial hardship condition of release. So you recall, that's the condition of release that says you're in receipt of income support payments and you can't meet ordinary living expenses. In that scenario, you can take up to $10,000 out. Now, that is administered by the trustee. So you have to kind of write to yourself as member to the trustee and say, look, I'm hard up. And that can be hard because we're not always objective with ourselves, Ray. And so sometimes...
Can't imagine why.
So we're in a bit of a pickle there, in the sense that we've got to be really disciplined and really objective and say, have I met the criteria? Have I put on file as trustee, as member, evidence that I've been in receipt of income support payments, such as job seeker payments? Also, I've got evidence of my financials to show that I cannot afford daily living expenses, such as rent or utility bills. So much higher level of scrutiny you'd need to apply yourself if you're a trustee of an SMSF.
And I think it's worthy to note to the listening audience and the viewers that sooner or later, someone's going to catch up with you if you're an SMSF trustee and you've dipped into your money in this manner, because you've then got to justify it not just to the ATO, you then have to justify it to an audit at the end of each financial year when the yearly report is done for the SMSF. And because they're now totally separated, again, great policy, because the tax agent that does the taxes for the SMSF are now different from the auditors. They used to be one and the same. Conflict of interest, that's no longer around. So you've then got to still convince the auditor that what you've done is correct. And again, let me assure you, Stuart, I've been on the receiving end of some pretty harsh CISA regulations and penalties. When they fine, they don't muck around. They punish very, very harshly in this space. So look, we're just about half time here. You're on Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money and investing. I'm with Stuart Sheary from IFPA, the Institute of Financial Professionals Australia. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back with you in just a moment. Hi, and thank you for listening to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly radio program about finance, money and investing on Radio Northern Beaches and nationally on the Community Radio Network around Australia. The views, comments and opinions aired during our program should not be construed or viewed as financial advice. Any commentary is general advice only and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation or needs. You should consider whether the advice is suitable for you and your personal circumstances. If in doubt, you should contact an authorised licensed financial planner. We welcome questions and feedback, and you can get in touch with us via our blog, social media channels or email. Please search for Dollars and Making Sense in your favourite podcast platform or check out our blog at otgcapital.com.au/blog. Hi, and welcome back to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money and investing. I'm your host, Ray Trevisan. I'm really pleased to have at the microphone Stuart Sheary, who is a superannuation specialist from the Institute of Financial Professionals of Australia, ifpa.com.au. Now, before we went to the break, we were talking about conditions of release and how people can get their money if they are in hardship or in certain circumstances that is still theirs, but it is locked up in superannuation. Now, Stuart, we talked about ATO's role and an SMSF trustee. Now, we talked about two primary reasons, compassionate and financial hardship. Do those two ever overlap?
They can overlap. They are distinct, but they don't preclude each other. So the rules for compassionate grounds you might satisfy, and you might satisfy the rules for severe financial hardship. So let's just say hypothetically we have John. John has lost his job. He's been out of work for a period of time. He's been on Centrelink or income support payments for over 26 weeks, and now he's struggling to keep up with his utility bills, his expenses, that kind of thing. He also just happens to not be up to date with his mortgage repayments. So in that scenario, he can potentially access monies under severe financial hardship by virtue of being in continuous receipt of income support payments and not being able to afford living expenses. But then because the bank is knocking on his door and they're about to foreclose on his home, he may also be able to access his monies under compassionate grounds. So the two can overlap.
I guess one of the things, again, reading the notes that you sent through, some of the conditions of release that that have been, I guess, used quite expansively. Home foreclosure we've talked about, funeral expenses and palliative care. So this incurs, I guess, some thought that people are at terminal cases of illness. Is this the kind of conditions of release that you see as well?
They make up a very small minority. So palliative care, to care for the terminal illness of a loved one, I think that only makes up about 1%. The big one is medical expenses. So medical expenses relating to treatment of a life-threatening condition, medical expenses in relation to acute or chronic mental illness, or medical expenses relating to acute or chronic pain do satisfy, and they make up about 95% of compassionate withdrawals. So of those medical expenses, I think dentistry is actually a big one. So yeah,
I'm just looking at the stats right now: dental, weight loss, and IVF. Now, again, people that don't have context, people that are in IVF, I've known couples that have struggled with it. Not only emotionally is it a huge toll, but it's damned expensive and not a lot of cover there from, I guess, medical benefits. So they dip into their super, it would appear, to be able to help them procreate. That's fascinating, isn't it?
They wouldn't always be eligible, but if it relates to one of those three areas that we just mentioned, that IVF could be an expense that would qualify in some scenarios.
Here's weight loss, for example, 18 odd thousand people, 25% of the people applying for medical conditions of release are weight loss. And I guess that ends up being people that have lap band surgery or the like. Pretty drastic stuff. But again, it could end up being life-threatening. But again, these are interesting facets that if people are aware, when money's really, really, really tight, situations can get really quite crazy, I guess. Now, let's talk a little bit more about conditions of release and the impacts around age. What's the situation when people are younger? Are they more inclined to be knocked back for this access? Or as they're older, there tends to be a bit more leniency because they don't have that long runway of ability to recover? I'm just curious, Stuart, on your views in that regard.
Well, keep in mind, once you're over the age of 60, you have other conditions of release. So what we're finding is that accessing super under compassionate grounds or severe financial hardship are generally options taken out by younger people simply because they're the only option. If you're over the age of 60, you've got potentially retirement condition of release, transition to retirement.
TRIS, yes, of
course, the TRIS. So what we're finding is that it's generally younger people that make these types of withdrawals.
And I guess once you start getting lumps of cash, we can't forget tax. So what's the situation around taxation?
great point. So again, because we're talking about people below the age of 60, as you're probably aware, if you make a withdrawal from super after the age of 60, it's generally tax-free regardless of the condition of release. But below age 60, yeah, I mean, the maximum rate of tax that will apply is 22%, but it could be less. So for example, if the member has what we call tax-free component in the fund, they've been making non-concessional contributions into super, that always comes out tax-free. So 22% is the maximum rate of withholding that the super fund will apply. And again, when you lodge your tax return, you might get a little bit of that back because it just so happens you don't have much other income. And being a maximum rate of tax, the ATO will give a little small refund because you've got your tax-free threshold available to you.
Yeah, you've got your tax-free threshold. I guess they give a little bit of leeway, I think, in the, although I think the Listo's no longer around, the low income, they'd give you a little bit of extra super in those instances, but also they give you a little bit of squiggle room on the tax as well, don't they?
That's right. So we all have a tax-free threshold of $18,200. So if we receive, a lump sum superannuation payment, regardless of our age, of less than that amount, and that's our only income, we're going to get get it refunded to us. And keep in mind, I think you alluded to it, you also have what we call the low income tax offset, which gives us an effective tax-free threshold of a little bit more than $18,200.
True. Now, again, we've talked about the processes. So I'm just looking here. You apply to the ATO via MyGov and you provide your evidence and you wait for the approval. And then in severe hardship, you go to your trustee. So if you are an industry fund, you go to whoever the big fund is or the private mob. So you go and talk to them, correct?
That's absolutely right. You'd go to the super fund and provide the evidence to them.
Cool. So I'm just curious, do you have an idea of how long it takes? Is it something that's quite a weighty, long time, or are they fairly expeditious in dealing with these situations?
Well, they were certainly very expeditious during COVID, I think you'll recall, because that was a means of, under compassionate grounds, I think they did that in record time, the release.
Yeah, didn't they?
Are they as efficient now? I don't have stats on that. I'd imagine that I have seen complaints, though, where the super funds have not been fast enough and they've gone to AFCA.
Oh, yeah.
So there is a bit of pressure on this because people are in need, right? And so we need to get them the money if they're eligible as quickly as possible.
I've seen that also with payment on probity and estates, waiting way too long for the payment. And again, people need to understand when a will is determined, super is outside of that. The binding death notification is the all-encompassing document, not the will. And so this gets caught up and a lot of people get snaffled a little bit. And I guess in summary, and as we wrap up, we've got resources. So people obviously go to MyGov as a great start, and also your super fund is a really good point. But I think, Stuart, I'm curious to get your view. Has there been any analysis done post-COVID now, the impact of these two $10,000 drawdowns that were allowed and people took a bucket load out? What's been the impact of doing that?
Here at the IFPA, we have not done our own analysis, but what I have seen on I think it's the ABC, that they gave the example or analysis where a 30-year-old who'd take out the two $10,000 lots, so one in the 1920 financial year and one in the 2021 financial year, they took out a total of $20,000. They're actually going to be $90,000 worth off at retirement. So, wow. Yeah, you really need to balance up the immediate need for the funds versus the future cost or loss, foregone earnings that you're going to suffer.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things that we keep on talking about. One of the things that, PJK, good old Paul Keating, kept on harping on about when he first rallied for super back in the 90s was the compounding effect. And the compounding effect is brilliant because it makes you a lot of money. But if you take it out, the compounding effect also punishes you quite a lot because that money is no longer compounding on your behalf. And so I think, I guess one of the key messages, I guess that together with you, Stuart, and your clients at IFPA, think carefully before you do this. You know, those kind of situations are pretty awful, and I have no doubt that, you know, these are situations of last resort, and they should be viewed that way, shouldn't they?
Absolutely, situation of last resort. So it will impact your long-term savings, as you mentioned. But if you're in dire need, it can act as a lifeline. And so it's I'm sure people with advisors will always recommend that people have a pool of emergency monies. Now, don't see super as another source of emergency funds. It's not that liquid, but it's not completely unreachable in times of needs.
And I think, as a positive note as well, Stuart, there are many, many ways that they can top their super back up on the way through to retirement. And, you know, we talked about your downsizers. If people are, you know, if they've retained that home now because super's helped them save their house, they then can make those contributions later in life when they downsize, and be able to contribute back. Super is always, always, always this wonderful, wonderful medium for you to be able to retire in, hopefully, the comfort that, that you'd like to become accustomed to. So, look, Stuart, we're just about out of time. Love to have you back on talking more about super, because it's always a great topic. Thanks for the topics and the information. IFPA is always a great place of a resource. Anywhere else you can recommend?
Yeah, the Institute of Financial Professionals Australia, we provide a lot of information on our site to our members. Also, the Australian Taxation Office provides a lot of material on conditions of release. And of course, go to your super fund. They often will have some generic client education material available.
Wonderful. Great advice. And Stuart, that's it. That's it for us. Thanks for being on Dollars and Making Sense. Check out all our socials, ladies and gents. And until next time, it's adios.
Thanks, Ray. Great to chat.
Cheers. Bye.